Okay, chapter 10. I am going to go through this very, very quickly. I want you to sort of note how many slides there are here. This is a really long chapter. What are there, like 46 slides? Because what it does is it gives you this overview. Whoops, let's start this. Okay. So it gives you this overview in this chapter about the developmental progression of different academic subjects: reading, math, social studies, and the arts. And so that you can appreciate what I want you to get out of this chapter is an appreciation for how different subjects start from their very basic roots and then expand through elementary school to become more and more complex. So some of it's a little bit redundant for some stuff we talked about in the previous chapter about language, although this one's going to focus more on reading and writing. But these are also topics, I'm not going to require you at this point to be diving so deep into them that you're like, oh, I could totally teach that. Because you're going to get specific classes in a lot of this other stuff, especially with regard to literacy. So what I want you to really focus on as you're reading this chapter is not trying to memorize every single detail, but of getting the sense of each of the topics. So I'm going to sort of focus on that, right? So just this basic thing, I think the thing about understanding education as a college student is that you really are just coming out of your standard educational experience. Some of you went to private schools and that had maybe a different type of curriculum, because we're talking about curriculum here, right? And some of you then obviously went to public schools, which has, some state standards and then some national standards, the No Child Left Behind Act. What was happening there, there's an attempt to balance the playing field. I think there's always an attempt to balance the playing field. That's where private schools come from. That's where charter schools come from. Oh, well, private schools also come from people who want a private school where they can integrate religious education and things of that nature. So you have all these different types of schools. And what was happening is that kids from underfunded public schools were not coming out of high school. Like an A in that school system was not a competitive A with regard to someone who got an A coming out of a private school that had a ton of money and resources and experiences. So you had some kids who were coming out of high school being exposed to calculus and architecture and all of these other things. And you have a kid coming out of maybe with A's coming out of an inner city school, but their curriculum was so far behind because of lots of reasons with regard to funding and poverty and all of that, that they're being graduated in their senior year with really a 10th grade level, right? Or like I said, I did some work with the schools in Trinidad, and I was going down there to help them with their preschool educational process, but by the time these kids get to 4th grade, they are 2 years ahead. I had a young girl, a 4th grader from Trinidad, come to the United States. And she was here for a week, and it was during the school year, and she was bored because her mom was here on business at the university. And we said, well, why don't you go and visit? Let's use some of our contacts, and you can go and visit like an American school and spend the day, like shadowing. So we hooked up with a parochial school. And in order for her not to be bored out of her mind after the first day, this 4th grader in a parochial school had to be put in a 6th grade classroom. Like I said, the standard of academic expectation was 2 years advanced from what anything we're doing in the United States. So that's one thing, right? In terms of global, when you look at it globally, but even within the United States, you've got kids coming out of an inner city school with the equivalent of a standardized 10th grade education. So they're already behind the 8 ball when they go off to college, they get an A, and they get a scholarship, and they go off to college, maybe a really competitive school, right? That like I used to work at the University of Michigan, And they had to do these things called bridge programs in the summer for kids from the inner city because there were just certain subjects like economics and things of that nature that the students just had never had the opportunity to learn. And so they would start school a semester early over the summer to get caught up on the stuff that other kids that they were going to be going to school with had already had in high school, right? They just didn't have those resources, or they didn't have enrichment classes, or they didn't have the funding to offer some of the electives and stuff like that. So you have these things like the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001, which required all this state testing, right? That the states have said, this is our standard. You cannot be a freshman in high school you can't finish your freshman year without knowing at least this. You can't, and so what's happening now is that in some schools those tests are really easy, and in some inner city schools it takes kids all their entire high school career to try and pass those tests. So I'm not sure national testing has done what it was supposed to do, but that's its purpose, just so you know, is to create this sort of standard of what kids have to know by the time they get out of certain grades. And we've even started looking, we call it, kindergarten readiness, preschool. We can take a look at the academic preparation, certainly of kindergartners going into first grade, and say, is this kid kindergarten ready? Is this kid first grade ready? And usually what we're talking about is, are they at the academic level that we expect them to be at that age? Okay, so that's what this whole chapter is going to be about. All right, so this first section here, this little thing, the only thing I want to highlight on this slide is this idea of adapting standards to student needs, meaning that that's what your IEP is for. We set a standard. You cannot finish first grade without knowing all of these things. But if you have an IEP, then we're not just potentially adjusting how we're going to teach you things by having goals in the IEP, but we may actually also adjust the standards by which we measure whether or not you're going to move on to the next grade, okay? So, and then paying attention to this stuff obviously helps you to develop age-appropriate methods and not overly frustrating them. Boom, go all the way back to Vygotsky in that chapter, and how what we're talking about is scaffolding here, creating the right scaffolding based on age-based norms and how children understand things at various ages. And then, back, foundational skills. Right? So foundation skills, that's our basic reading, writing, and arithmetic, all the basics that you need in language, the basics that you need to know in order to build all the rest of your educational knowledge. That is why I think elementary school teachers are the most important teachers. And in my mind, that's where the interventions in inner city schools have to come from, because what's happening are kids are going into middle school without being able to read. There is now, I think, a rule that you cannot graduate somebody out of fourth grade if they don't know how to read, if they're not reading at an age grade level, and there's some difficulty. There's some real difficulty with that. So those first 4 years, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, are so important for making sure that a kid is ready and has all the foundational skills that they need. All right, so let's get into it. Reading. I'm going to really do like a top level on this. You can kind of, I'll do some discussion questions that have you deep dive into your chapter a little bit more about this. But here's what we're talking about. When we talk about emergent literacy, learning and understanding and being curious about written language starts in end of preschool. Definitely spend a ton of time on it in kindergarten. Learning to read starts in kindergarten. And so what do you need to know, right? What do you need to know to be ready to learn about written language and to learn about reading? So you have to understand through experience that print conveys meaning. This is why being read to is so important. And this is why a lot of kids whose parents work 2 jobs in the inner city and stuff like that, they don't get read to a lot. And it was interesting because even in Trinidad, the little kids didn't get read to a lot. It was hard to get them to sit in circle time. But that's really what you're doing, is you're telling a story and you're pointing to the words and you're conveying to them that this print has meaning. You usually, it comes with a sense of pleasure, right? So it's fun to read and listen to stories and books, mostly because it starts with mom and that relationship is leveraged to make that feel good. Spoken language is transcribed according to certain rules, and so you learn those rules. by being read to, and by not just sitting in front of someone, but when you read to kids, you sort of show them the pictures and you show them the words and you show them. All of that isn't just so they stay engaged. All of that is to engage that early literacy, and understanding about the fact that all of these little words come together to create a sentence, which come together to create a paragraph, when to turn the page, right? Little kids will try and turn the page. They don't realize necessarily that you're reading, and they'll try to turn the page on you when they get bored on that page, even if you have more words to say. So in the very beginning, they're just interested in books, looking at picture books, right? They learn that written language has a predictable element and conventions. Before they read, they may copy the intonation. They may look at the picture and then copy the intonation and make up their own story. They're not actually reading, but they'll look at the picture and they'll try to read it, or they'll try to assume it. If you've ever seen that happening in kindergarten or even preschool, where a child will be like reading a book to you and they'll look at the picture and they'll tell you a story about that picture and they'll point to the words as if they're doing exactly what the adult did, but they're not actually reading the words that are there. So obviously, caregivers encourage by modeling and sharing literacy experiences, meaning they read to their kids. That's just a big way of saying that. Phonological awareness. So some age ranges: detecting syllables within words by age 4, dividing syllables into parts by age 5. So look at the ages of this. We're talking about preschool, kindergarten, and first grade. Identifying individual phonemes, the ability to sound things out, right? So it's facilitated by reading books with rhymes and asking children. So when you teach someone to read, I was reading this article about how the mistake that parents make is that they try to get kids to understand like the word, like it's and it's not really like, I'm trying to think of it like, okay, let's look at this page and let's talk about the word books. Okay, second to last sentence, we're trying to get a kid kid is trying to learn to identify the word books. And instead of going books, 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 what teachers will do is teachers will go buh, 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 and work on the sounds with children, right? That's how you develop phonological awareness. So that B, like sometimes parents will look at that and go, so that's a B, but it's not, it's a buh, right? Isn't it? It's a buh, and it's about to be a buh, right? Buh, how do you pronounce the two? So you work more with pronunciation rather than letters. Once you understand what the letters are, those letters have to be paired with their sound in order to get this phonological awareness. All right, the progression of word recognition, identifying words in a context. So sometimes you can guess what the word should be based on the context that it's in. Identifying the visual characteristics first of letters. In using letters for cues, that's the buh, buh, buh thing I was talking about. Sounding out words. And then recognizing, so sight vocabulary. There are certain words that you will recognize automatically. And so those are usually done first, sight words. So you're working on pronunciation, but you also work in kindergarten a lot on sight words. All right, the development of reading comprehension. Understanding, obviously, first that letters put together are words and words put together are sentences. And then the use of sentences to tell a story. Then the ability to think about, remember I told you a lot of kids who have processing issues, this is where they start to have a hard time. This is sort of still elementary school. They'll start doing this in kindergarten, big time in first grade, identifying the main idea of a story. Even if that main idea, you can have a story that's 4 sentences and still ask what the main idea was, even if the main idea was that Susie went camping in her backyard. And maybe there are only, last Sunday, Susie went camping in her backyard. What did Susie do? She went camping in her backyard. That is helping them identify the main idea of something. Okay, does that make sense? And then making inferences and predictions. So Susie went camping in the backyard. What might she do next? And then you'll have kids say things like whatever their experiences are. If they've been camping, they might say, set up the tent or cook some s'mores or something along those lines for inferences and predictions. And then detecting the author's assumptions and biases. And so this is where you really start to get into later in school, where you're talking about, something abstract, like what did the author mean by this poem and what are the themes and metaphors. See that underline, dependent on knowledge base. So this is all very dependent on what you've been exposed to and your experiences in the world. So kids with less resources and less exposure struggle. They just struggle more with this, right? With this kind of stuff. They need more practice at it. Metacognition with regard to reading. It is that unconscious awareness that reading involves making sense of text. It comes, right? Like when those kids are starting to look at pictures and even do pre-reading, there is a sense that this understanding that these printed symbols that are letters that are put into words, they make sense of the story, right? That's what text is. It makes sense of the story. And then of course, strategies for comprehending written material. So monitoring your own comprehension. You know how you get frustrated the older you get, and the more pressure that's on you, which I'm sure you guys are feeling so much of right now. You can read something and you can be like, oh, I just read that whole page and didn't even have an idea of what I just read. And you have to go back and read it again, right? So backtracking, going back in, looking for relevant material. First you skim, then you go back and you find the main ideas. So at first, when you're teaching kids comprehension and understanding, their ability to look at a question and then go back to the paragraph to find the answer that they're looking for is also a big step. Okay. There are genetic bases for exceptional verbal ability and kids who have difficulties. So here are some disabilities that affect literacy. Intellectual disabilities, sensory disabilities, so obviously the ability to see, things like that. And then dyslexia, which is when you screw up your words, your letters are backwards and stuff. And then you can have processing issues, processing speed issues, aphasia, those kinds of things. Girls tend to read better and to enjoy it more. And that's unfortunate. Boys need to really be encouraged. That's why I like those things like Captain Underpants and stuff like that. People really try to write books for boys. But I think if you really look at it, there just are more books written for girls. And maybe it's supply and demand, but we need to focus more on writing books that boys tend to gravitate toward. Socioeconomic status differences. There's more literacy because there's a more literacy-rich environment. And so they come to school with more advanced skills, even, when they start. But that doesn't mean that I think parents should be doing flashcards with a 2-year-old so that they know how to read, because most of those things are sight words, by the way. Most of that stuff that kids come with are sight words. It's not necessarily that they're, quote, comprehension reading ready. And then obviously we want to do anything having to do with language. We want to intervene as quickly as possible. As soon as we know there's a difficulty, we want to maximize that potential by creating changes in the way that we teach kids things. And emotional development, by the way, we'll get to the chapter on emotion here pretty quickly, but emotions have everything to do with interfering with the ability to learn to read and to write and to do math. And we'll talk about that when we get to that chapter and how to deal with that, because it's one thing to have a learning disability and have strategies. It's another thing when a kid's anxiety or loyalty conflicts are impacting their ability to let themselves learn. And so we'll talk about that in later chapters. Obviously, emphasis on reading varies by culture. Some people don't have time for it. Books can be expensive, all that kind of stuff. Children prefer short stories that reflect their own cultural practices, so you always want to try to have books that are appropriate. I have created a list of books and stuff. Oh, maybe I will just share it with you. Maybe I'll post it on Canvas just as a little FYI. I've recently put together a list of books to give to teachers about teaching kids about germs and pandemics and things of that nature. So maybe I'll just post it for you so you can have it sort of as a toolbox on your computer someplace. You just never know when as a teacher, you should always just be collecting materials and stuff, whether it's digitally or in hand. You never know. You never know. I don't think this stuff with germs is over anytime soon. So I think they'll be relevant. So I will go ahead and post that and send out an email about it. All right, so promoting reading development, foster emergent literacy, all that stuff, reading with kids, pointing to letters, showing them pictures, helping them to understand that the pictures mean things. Encourage reading outside of school. We always try to get parents to read. We loan our books to our parents. Kids can take books home to read with their parents from our school. Provide explicit instruction and activities that are engaging. So being specific with kids, that's all just about making things feel good, right? Allowing students to make their own choices, group discussions about books, make available a variety of media so that kids have access. It's all about access and enjoyment. And that's happening a lot right now. That's what we'll do. I was struggling with what kind of discussion questions. I think I'm going to have you guys find videos of some of the celebrities that are, I wonder if there's enough for each of you. I'll have to do some research first, because there's a ton of celebrities right now that are reading to children online, right? And it's so that children can be read to. I mean, the importance of that, it cannot be overstated. And then, provide opportunities to practice reading aloud and silently. I worked with a high school 11th grade teacher in the inner city who was getting her kids to pass the state tests when no other classes were, because she started making her 11th graders read out loud in class. And it changed everything. The reading out loud in class, unfortunately, I think has diminished somewhat, but it's that's not true. When we observed, where did we observe? We observed at Hilltop. Whoever was sitting in the classroom with me at Hilltop, the fourth graders were reading aloud. I think in that case, the teacher was reading and then was asking them comprehension questions. So they were kind of reading along. But I have to believe that there are days when they have to do the reading out loud. But reading out loud, and you have to make sure that nobody gets laughed at or shamed or anything like that. And you have to manage that piece of the classroom. We'll talk about that. There's a chapter that covers classroom behavior management, and that's part of that. Elicit transfer of skills across different languages. So even in kindergarten, you're teaching like some Spanish and stuff. And then identify and address problems as early as possible. So you people who want to be kindergarten, first grade, second grade, you're going to be catching a lot of these things, and you don't want to wait too long to ask for some help. For some, more significant evaluation. All right, so that's reading. Pause. Let's talk about writing. The developmental progression of this. So think about this. This is a cognitive, so if reading is a very cognitive visual task, and speaking is a cognitive, muscular, facial, and throat, and all of those things task and integration. Writing is a fine motor task, right? And so it's not just comprehension, it's comprehension that has to integrate with the motor cortex with regard to hand movement, right? In order to write smoothly, in order to make letters correctly, in order to do things like spacing of words and sentences, so that they don't all run together. There are certain things that have to be done visually and fine motor wise. So here's where we start. Random scribbling. That's when kids write things for you, and then you go, what does it say? And then they tell you what it says. Pseudo writing, which is a little more organized than scribbling, like they are sort of letters, almost letters. They put together then letters and letter combinations, but they don't know how to spell. Then they get into words. And then when they get into words, they have to work on spacing the word, spelling the word correctly. They usually do it phonetically at first, right? And so there's some common errors. And then they get into, when do you capitalize? When do you put a period at the end of your sentence? All of these little things, that's all in kindergarten, first grade. And then clear writing that expresses clear thinking. So we start with writing a clear sentence, and then we ask for 2 sentences, then we ask for 3 sentences, and pretty soon we're asking them to write a short paragraph. And some of them I think are very funny. God, elementary school is so fun. There's so much. Look at all the stuff that happens in elementary school. Just an explosion of knowledge that forms the foundation of everything these kids will experience later in their lives. It's such an important job. So, so important. So changes through elementary school: smoother, smaller, more regular letters, like the handwriting. It becomes automatic, so they don't have to focus on it. You can listen to the teacher and you can write, so you don't have to think what an A looks like after a while. It just becomes automatic. And then stabilizes and sometimes worsens in adolescence. That's because adolescents get impulsive, and so they start to write faster, and they start to just let their brains be more careless with the way that they write. And you sort of see a stylistic thing happening by the time you get through elementary school and into middle school. Some people write tiny, tiny, tiny. Some people write really, really big. So you start to see all these interesting individual differences. And this, by the way, is where the conversation is had, is does it make sense to teach kids cursive? Because this is you guys are going to be deep involved in the fact that you're not going to be teaching cursive, and people are going to have big feelings about that still. Okay. Spelling. Correlated with phonological awareness. That makes sense, right? If you can sound something out, you can probably spell it. Invented spelling, that's actually part of the development of the ability to read and write. Is invented spelling is when they kind of think they know, but instead of writing book book, it might end up as book bouk, depending, right, on something like that. So you start to learn common letter patterns. So this is where you start to get into spelling bees. Spelling bees, they ask for, like, eventually you get so sophisticated you can say like country of origin or language of origin or whatever, Latin, Greek, and then they know that there are certain letter patterns included, and those are what makes a really good speller. So the basics are ing, ing. Anything that sounds like ing is always ing, right? So you start to learn that, and then accurate spelling learned, and then it becomes automatic as well. And then when you get older, like me, I hate to tell you this, but sometimes and maybe it happens to you anyway, but it happens more as you get older. When you have just so much on your mind and you get distracted, sometimes you get a hiccup in your automatic, and you go to spell something and all of a sudden you're like, that can't be right. Like, you just completely forget how something is spelled. That is a retrieval. You know how to spell it, but it's a retrieval issue from long-term memory. Like, all of a sudden you can't be sure that you know what you're actually spelling. And it happens more, I think, now because we have spell check, so we get a lot more casual about our typing and our spelling. Syntax and grammar, sentence length increases from just a few words, like see Jane run, that kind of stuff, increasing in length and structure, using more adjectives and adverbs. And that's where they were really such a good 2-3 years ahead. When I was working in Trinidad, it was amazing. It was in the structure and the complexity of the sentences. And then capitalization and punctuation skills become automatic. That's why we do so much repetition with little kids around periods and question marks and things, is because, and grammar, every year, grammar, because it becomes more and more complex. And so writing becomes more fluid, and you're, by the time you take your SATs, right, you need to have your essays down. So then you get into essay writing and organizing your ideas. So early writing is purposeful. Thank you notes. You know what I like here, kindergarten teachers? Notes home, not thank you notes. We start our kids in elementary school. We'll say, I feel like you have a worry about that, or you seem really proud about that. Do you want to write a note to your mom? And then it starts with them telling you what the note should say, right? Pre-composition. And you write it for them because they're not writers yet. And then in kindergarten, they can then write letters to their parents about something they did they were proud of, something they did they were worried about. Anything that they might want to communicate to their parents on that particular day is a fantastic way to work on composition, because you can do it pre-writing. They can do it verbally before they can do it on paper. Narrative writing precedes expository writing. That just means writing like, what I do over summer break, right? Or what did I do over the weekend is narrative writing versus expository. But these kids were doing expository writing in 4th grade. It was amazing. All right. And then, so the increase, what does it look like? The ability to develop a topic in depth, ability to take an audience into account when you're writing, to think about who's going to be reading it is a whole developmental step away from egocentrism. Ideas are more cohesive and less rambly. And knowledge telling yields to knowledge transforming. And so your thoughts become more integrated as you are explaining things to somebody else, which is why it's great when kids explain things. Yeah, it integrates it differently. Okay, children have difficulty identifying problems in their writing because they know what they wanted to write. So they don't know that other people, that they've spelled it so badly that other people cannot understand it. So they'll look at you somewhat incredulously when you ask them to translate their writing for you because they think you should know what that word means because they understood it when they wrote it, and they don't necessarily have an awareness of how wrong their spelling might have been. Rewriting tend to make small superficial changes. Editing skills emerge slowly and are incomplete by the end of adolescence. That's why writers have editors, by the way. Excuse me. I'm doing a lot of talking today. All right, intellectual disabilities, problem with the mechanics. You may have issues if you have like a cerebral palsy or something along those lines. You may have fine motor skills that makes writing difficult. It may be a difficulty expressing complex ideas. Again, same with the writing or the reading. Girls tend to write and spell better. Girls seem more confident in this area. But culture is pretty, writing is pretty universal. Within the language, right? Within the language. So provide tools for drawing and writing. So always have kids, scribbling is a good thing. It's a developmental step to scribble. Provide authentic writing tasks. I want to introduce a concept here, and I want you to really think about this. This is going to be one of your discussion questions, and it is not in your book, okay? It is strictly from this lecture, and it is talking about things being experienced near. Okay, when you try to teach a child something and you are giving them the context of volcanoes and dinosaurs, it is so far away from their experience that you have to create an experience that is near to them, right? So experience near is explaining something and using a familiar experience. And so having them authentically write means to write about themselves. And I think that it is so important to make sure, because cultural will change this. It's not just, even, it's easy to start when you're little, like name 3 things to describe yourself, or write down 3 things that describe you, or write down what your family did over the weekend. That's experience near, that's authentic writing tasks. And then, then it's about the book you read last night and things of that nature, but make sure you're taking into account culture, right? The experience near. I'll probably ask you to describe that and to find an example of a task that you might do for, like a writing example for a 4th grader that would be experience near. And then scaffold, helping them. And that's the offering choices about topics. I tend to give people a lot of choices because it's much more interesting to spend, 8 pages or 6 pages on a research paper if you're actually researching something that you enjoy and feel strongly about. And then writing across the curriculum. You will have literacy goals no matter what subject you are teaching. All right. I know this is a long one. We are on to mathematics. This arithmetic, algebra, geometry, statistics, pretty much everything, right? But you have to start at the very beginning, and that's where we are starting as early childhood teachers. We are starting with counting, right? In preschool, we are counting things. We are counting in our heads. We are counting numbers. We are counting objects. We are counting. Oftentimes kids will skip, to be like 12, 13, 16. Like they make those kinds of mistakes at first. But they learn that something has an order and that these numbers put things in order and they categorize things and they rank things. And there's lots of stuff that you have to do with counting before you can get into adding those numbers together. They have to visually know what 2 looks like, like you start using blocks or beans or whatever it might be. knowledge of basic concepts and procedures, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, those, right? And then metacognition, obviously, we'll talk about that. So number sequence and counting, awareness of quantity of things by 5 months, that's so early. I don't know how they're measuring that. By 5 months, awareness of quantity. That's got to be in a sensory way, like the sense of bigness and smallness, maybe? A sense of full and not full. And that's pretty intense. I'm not sure how they were measuring that. I'd have to go take another look at your book. It's been a while. By age 3, they're counting. They're super proud of it. By 5, they've mastered the one-to-one principle. This is 1, this is 2, kind of one thing for each number. Order for small sets, like the order irrelevance. So the sometimes you can rank order, sometimes you sometimes you don't. I don't know if it's getting late. I don't know if I have the right words for that one. You'll cover all of that in other classes as well. Okay, so the smallest number. So you start with an inaccurate set of knowledge. So what does that mean? It means we don't get into negative numbers right away. Negative numbers are too abstract. There's no good visual way to play with blocks and deal with negative numbers. So smallest number is either 0 or 1. Numbers become larger as they move further from 0. Addition is making a bigger number. Subtraction is making a smaller number out of something. Okay. In early elementary school, so this is the stuff that really applies to you here. There's a part and a whole, so pies, and using that. Basics of proportion, and size. So a lot of that becomes visual. A lot of math is visual math in the beginning. Middle school and adolescence, then we talk about fractions, complex fractions, and then abstract concepts like variables and things like pi and all of those more abstractions into numbers that don't necessarily have a correlate until you get to like physics. That's why I always liked physics, because it was applied math. And I could almost see the math, and that made so much more sense to me than sort of just your basic algebra equation. So infants, preliminary understanding, I mean, they have one thing in one hand and another thing in another hand. So that's a concept of numbers, isn't it? Right? To have something in both hands, have two things that you pick up. I think so. By age 3, they can add objects, like how many is this? For sure. They can do worksheets where they're counting things. Taking away objects. So if you're looking at something and I'm showing you 3 blocks and I take away 1 block, I can teach you the basics of math by saying how many blocks are left. And so when you take away, you've gone from 3 to 2 or whatever it might be. Simple division by sharing things, right? How do you break something into 4 pieces? And so dividing a pie or a sandwich in half or any of those things is the beginning of division and fractions. By age 4, by age 4, add and subtract by counting things, like taking away 1 and counting it. That's like late preschool, early kindergarten. And then early elementary, knowing pluses and minuses from memory, mental math, the beginning of mental math. Understanding place value, tens, right? What's in the tens place? What's in the ones place? And then beginning in early elementary, instruction on multiplication and division. All those basics, right? That's so important. Just know how important that is to be teaching those basics. Some people will think it's easy, but it's not. It's not easy to teach the basics because they have to get them and they have to become automatic in order to build on them. And that is so much integrated knowledge. Okay, so place value allows carrying and borrowing. Oh my God, you guys are going to be doing Common Core math, and I apologize. That is not my area. Somebody else will teach you that. So carrying and borrowing when adding and subtracting. So the difference between adding and subtracting 1 digit versus 2 digits, double digit numbers. Number lines allowing comparisons and other operations. So you guys know what a number line is, right? It's like a line and you start on 0 and it goes to whatever 10 and you can allow comparisons with other operations. So if you're taking away 1, you go back and there's little humps. I think that's part of Common Core. Okay, I think that covers enough of that. So by age 4, a little versus a lot, for sure. To count equals the number in the set. So there's what's in a set? 1, 2, 3. There are 3 of these things in this set. By age 6, a more integrated, more automatic knowledge of counting and understanding the concept of more or less. The mental number line in terms of what's greater than or less than. All of those, right? Remember that? All the little greater than and less than signs. And then which has more. We talked in Piaget about conservation of mass. But when we're talking about numbers, we're talking about a cluster of things. So, but then you get into mental math, like in coins, which is more, 5 pennies or 1 nickel. Yeah. And it's going to start out with those kind of early errors based on Piaget's cognitive concepts. So by age 8, so we're talking about like 2nd grade here, right? Maybe 5, 6, 7, 3rd grade. Use 2 number lines simultaneously to solve problems. Which number is closer to 25, 21, or 18? Being able to do that sort of mental math. By age 10, generalize to the entire number system. Which number is bigger, the difference between 6 and 9 or the difference between 8 and 3? So you see how they have to, so here's what has to happen in that example. The difference between 6 and 9 is a calculation that you have to do mentally in your head. And then do a separate one, and remember the first one, and then do a separate one, what's the difference between 8 and 3, and then compare the products of those 2 computations. So by age 10, that's what they've been able to do. That is amazing when you think about short-term memory, working memory, long-term memory, processing, remembering, understanding the process involved in that, holding those numbers in your head, or maybe if you can't remember it well, you get the first answer and you jot it down. Not having to use something visual, those things all start to develop when it comes to age 10. Okay, so planning, monitoring, and evaluating, that's what makes, for some people, I'm not a math person, so that's what makes math hard, is this idea of understanding these more and more complex abstractions with regard to numbers, and evaluating your knowledge and making sure your numbers all stay in the same row, and understanding the importance of some of those rules to organize numbers and be able to do them. So you want to be able to check the accuracy of your calculations, right? So that's where we go check your work, right? We want kids to self critique, if you will. Monitor the effectiveness of the strategies that you're using. So Common Core is a strategy, and I haven't looked into it to understand enough why people thought that was a change that needed to be made. And then consider whether the final solution is logical. There's a sense that you can look at something and go, I don't think that number's right. That number should be bigger when you get to the end of that particular division problem. Like some things are just not illogical. Like, oops, I made a mistake somewhere because that's not even close to what I think it should be if I were to estimate, right? So sometimes we work with kids on estimating in elementary school as well. So metacognition is enhanced when students have to explain what they did. So this is why teachers will often ask, so tell me how you got that. Show your work. Tell me how you got that answer. Like when they bring kids up to the board, they'll say, okay, and tell us how you got that answer. And they have to explain it. It helps with their integration and their understanding of the rules. Okay, so learning disabilities in this area can affect comprehension, things becoming automatic. There may be a problem there. Knowing what the important pieces are. Some people fall apart with story problems. Being able to pull out the important data and solve the problem and figure out what calculation needs to be used based on the problem at hand. Dyscalculia, don't see numbers right. You get them. It's like dyslexia, but instead of lexia, it's calcula. So it's dyscalculia, which is the numbers part, right? Boys' abilities and disabilities are more variable than girls. Boys start to stand out if they're going to stand out, but they can also have a lot of learning disabilities in this area. Selling in the market, classroom procedures affect when and how math concepts are learned. So some people get into it really early, and there's a lot of resources at home for it. And some people have huge feelings about numbers because of poverty, potentially. You know what I mean? Like not having enough of something. It has an emotional component to it. So sometimes numbers are not neutral, and we'll talk about that in later chapters. The form of number words, like 10 2. So understanding the word 12, right? The word 12 and what it represents. And sometimes some other languages will use a combination of the two numbers that are involved. That, like a 10 2 would be 12. All right, promoting development in math. So teach numbers and counting very early. Use manipulatives and visual displays so that they can create good schemas around what numbers are representing. Encourage visual spatial thinking, puzzles. Challenges and scaffolding, obviously that's in every chapter. Arrange for children to apply mathematical tools in service of the community. So measuring things and selling things and making change and playing store and understanding how math applies to their everyday life. Okay. Interactive technologies. I think we've talked about that before. Different schools using different things, like the Alex program that I love so much. Encourage children to invent, use, and defend strategies. So Common Core does that. It offers you like multiple strategies, and then the children are allowed to sort of develop an affinity for one or the other that works for them. I don't know how that's working. I haven't really talked to people about it. All right, breather. We've done reading, writing. Now we're going to do math. Reading, writing, math, and now we're going to do science. So here's the thing about science. Remember I told you in the cognitive development chapter, I talked about the fact that we are all little scientists running around in the world testing our theories, developing theories of self, theories of other people. We're, mixing shampoo and conditioner in the tub and trying to figure out what happens if I do this and what happens if I do that. So we come to this world as experimenters, really. And so science develops through a sense of curiosity. And if that curiosity pre-formal science learning, if just curiosity about the world is supported, if questions are answered, then inquiry becomes invested with feeling good about yourself. And it becomes fun to learn things. What I just said is nowhere in your book. It is the emotional aspect of learning. We are little scientists, and we are curious, and we start to ask questions as soon as we have the language to do so. And if our questions are shut down, or we're made to feel stupid for the questions that we ask, or people don't have time for us, or they're not paying attention, we lose our curiosity. But if if every why question we had is answered in some way or another, even if it's with an I don't know, we'll have to look that up or something like that, then our curiosity satisfies us. It triggers the pleasure centers of your brain, and you become a little scientist. And it's something that we don't necessarily, I think, do well enough in our very, very busy society. So children construct knowledge and beliefs based on what they understand. They can only have their access to their cognitive stuff, right? So based on early understandings, biology is living versus non-living. Something is alive or it's dead. And then the physical world, there are differences in textures that we recognize right away. So textures and substances and liquids versus solids and dirt versus kinetic sand, the differences in kinetic sand and things like that. So elementary lessons in science build on and correct intuitive beliefs that are started way before elementary school. And kids love to come back and tell their families and their therapists all the things they've learned in school about different things. Some kids get fascinated by sarcophaguses. I had one kid who would talk to me all day long about the difference between a coffin, a casket, and a sarcophagus. He was very into the differences. Needless to say, emotionally, he was also very into understanding death. because he had had some losses. And he learned about Egypt, and then blam, he went off on this huge exploration of the different, what does it mean? What was interesting is because he had some flaws, right? So caskets were for humans, coffins are for vampires, and sarcophagus are for Egyptians. Was what he see the error in the thinking. And so what science class is going to do is it's going to correct some of that and then expand on it, and then he's going to learn all kinds of things about Egypt, right? He's going to start to learn about how they prepare the body and all of those things, and it seems creepy and gross, but if you remember at Hathaway Brown, when they were talking to us about student-led, where the students' interests are, the little scientists in them, when they start picking up rocks outside and looking at bugs, they do a whole lesson on ants. So they follow that natural curiosity, and that's the development of science. Okay? Scientific reasoning skills, developing a hypothesis, it happens unconsciously, it happens super, super early, but to be able to think about something abstractly and then test whether you're right or wrong in a conscious way comes, later. And developing a hypothesis, you have to know some stuff first, right? That's what knowledge base means. Controlling variables, that's much more sophisticated. Understanding what the variables are that may be involved in the cause and effect that you're trying to study. And then collecting and interpreting evidence and avoiding confirmation bias. So learning to be objective, which is not an easy thing for kids to do, which is why we start out with things that are emotionally a little bit distant for them. Kids will often have biases about things that feel emotional. But if you're talking about growing seeds, or you're talking about, if you're talking about, something, this is where you get into experience far. There's, something that's become neutral, which is neutrality, emotional neutrality, and how it impacts learning is something we'll talk about when we get to the behavioral sections, which I think are next. And then understanding science as a process of discovery and a dynamic body of ideas, and that people argue about things. But it is second nature to us to be in science and to be exploring things, and to read things critically and to think about their own ideas and where they would disagree and things of that nature is all about science. It is true, science has been considered male dominated, but that's why we have STEM now, and that's why we have things like Girls Who Code and all that kinds of good stuff, because girls are starting to get pushed more in that direction, and when they are pushed more in that direction, they end up really liking it and they excel at it. Okay. So, show children the relevance of science to what they already know. Teach them that they are already curious people who have a brain that works for scientific exploration. Authentic scientific investigations, things that are close to them. Provide age-appropriate explanations, meaning don't over-explain a topic to the point where they get confused because they'll lose interest. Work to promote conceptual change, which means helping them to develop their understanding of something they think they knew and to deepen that understanding or correct misconceptions. And then to write about scientific topics. All right, social studies. I think this is our last section. So social studies there's an emotional piece to this because there are so many things you have to understand, right? Let's think about social studies. You have to lose your egocentrism when you study about other things and other places and other peoples like Egypt. And you have to have some conceptualization sometimes when you think about history, about time and the passage of time. And, one of the questions on an IQ test is, what does the word ancient mean? And to understand the word ancient, you have to understand how long ago something was. Dinosaurs. And kids who first learn about dinosaurs, they get confused about how long ago dinosaurs existed. And so they can get confused about whether or not dinosaurs are currently present in the world or could be present in the world tomorrow. And so emotional stuff comes up around social studies because it is so tied to the path of emotional development. So underline, 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 we will come back to social studies when we do the behavioral stuff. And so they have to have a sense of the understanding of how other people are and that other people are different from them. And, and how to see the world. that explanation is probably not even close to sort of what your book is going to tell you, but that's really what it is. I'm sure they'll tell you obviously what's on the slide, but they won't expound on it in its connection to emotionality, and feelings and egocentrism and things of that nature. So see right here, children learn social studies most effectively when they can relate concepts to personal knowledge. That's why history and government and all that is so hard, because it just doesn't feel relevant to them at the time. But when you get older, you start to really get interested in history and geography and where things are and all those things that just seemed meaningless at the time. So getting them connected to it, I think with the internet is a little bit easier. See, there you go. Help understanding why people remote in time and place acted as they did, because it's so different from them. And that can be a real struggle. So understanding an autobiographical self. So before you can understand the history of the world, you have to understand that you were a baby once and now you're not. There you go, right? Understanding long ago versus more recent. We start that with toddlers. Soon you'll be able to go to the park. Soon you can have a snack. Soon, wait a minute, hang on. All that waiting gives you a sense of time passing, and that's how you learn how, what was long ago, what was more recent, past, present, future, all that stuff. And so you have to begin to learn that. So history is best understood as stories about people. And kids love it. I mean, they love social studies. Geography, understanding that a map is a symbol and a tool. Kids can really get into this in kindergarten. Some are really good at it. Some are like not interested at all. Boundary lines, they expect boundary lines from a map to be on the ground, which is kind of cute. I had my kid who was obsessed with death. He had a thing for plaques, because plaques to him looked like gravestones. And so he would see like somebody gets a tree dedicated to them and there'd be a plaque. And he made the assumption that anywhere there was a plaque in the park, a dead body was buried underneath it. Right? Okay. Gotta straighten some things out with regard to symbols and things. And his dad used to teach him, he really liked geography. His dad used to take him geocaching. So he learned how to read maps and stuff like that. It was fun. And he started that when he was 4 or 5. So they need to learn that geography is more than just names and locations. There's the why and the where, and there's this sense of trying to envision something you can't necessarily see. The internet gives us so much more access to that. Being able to virtually take tours of places and things and museums and stuff makes geography and distance, I think, more attainable from a visual perspective. By adolescence, developing an understanding of customs, experiences of inhabitants of the world, and politics, by the way, and the differences in geographical region. Visual art. Okay, so one of my business partners is an art therapist, and so we talk a lot about art. We teach art to toddlers, and she teaches art. I teach music. She teaches art, and it is so fascinating to watch toddlers develop this conceptualization of what art is. And so there's lines and there's dots and there's, they love these little bingo markers. I would highly recommend them with littles. She uses those bingo markers, I think is what they are, like a dabber. And God, do these kids love it. They love to dab, and they make dots all over their page, and they make skies, and then they seem to know to dab them once you tell them, and they really like the dots, and they will make all kinds of shapes. So we're talking about lines, dots, shapes in combination. Then you move on to human figures. Then this is, I don't know that all of us develop. My visual art skills are not great. Like sky at top, grass on bottom, but there's no depth perception to it, right? Some people never develop that. But your drawings become more realistic, sometimes more emotional, and then people are drawn to it usually by middle school. They love to draw. People who are going to be good at it love to draw, and they seem to be really good with perspective and things of that nature. So music, this is my jam. This is my area. I have worked with kids. I will tell you that I have had kids as young as 6 months old that have been able to work with shakers, holding those egg-shaped shakers, and keep rhythm and follow rhythm and mimic rhythm. And you see these videos of kids bouncing all the time. And we are born with an ability to perceive rhythm. And Absolute pitch. I wish I had absolute pitch. There are some people out there. Um, who is it that I'm thinking of that has absolute pitch? He's fascinating to watch. Um, 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 oh crap, what's his name? Um, it'll come to me and then I will say it. But people who have in the music industry that have absolute pitch are oftentimes they're amazing composers and they hear music in a very different way. And Oliver Sacks wrote a book called Musicology. So if this is an area of yours, I highly, highly, highly recommend you take that book and make it part of your library. He talks about the neurological differences in people who have a tendency towards music. And there is definitely a part of the brain that is more active in the brains of people with musical ability, and certainly with people who have absolute pitch. It is going to drive me crazy. Hang on, I'm going to keep talking, but while I'm talking, just so you guys know what I'm doing, I am grabbing my phone and I am looking him up because I know you're going to know who I'm talking about as soon as I say who it is. Charlie Puth. There you go. Charlie Puth. If you follow him on Instagram, there sometimes, especially now during this virus, if you're an Instagram social media person, there's a lot of interesting stuff to see online with regard to different musicians and mostly musicians in my mind, and their process, because they're just taping themselves at home playing the piano. And he did one that was like a question, like ask him anything. And because he has perfect pitch, somebody sent in a short video of their dog howling, and they said, what note is my dog, like what note is my dog howling in? And he answered, he was like, something like he starts off in a high C and then shifts down into an F sharp or something, along those lines. And that's his brain. And if you follow him on Instagram, 90% of his day appears to be playing around with music, listening. The way he listens to music is very, very different. So if you're into music, follow him on Instagram and see some of the things that he's been doing, because you really get to see what it looks like in somebody who has perfect pitch and how obsessed he is with music, because I think he hears the world. He walks through and he's the kind of person that can hear chatter in a restaurant and know what note that is, like what the pitch of that is. And it appears to be all consuming. He's an interesting character because of that. It appears to be all consuming for him with regard to his music. And then there's another little girl. Oh, she's been super famous on YouTube. She has her own channel. What is her name? Her father auditioned for The Voice and she was on it. And she sings like the Moana songs and the Disney songs. And she also, there's a video on YouTube where her dad gives her a test and to determine if she has perfect pitch. Obviously, he's a musician and he's cultivated this in her. And she's like 5 or 6 now. And she has perfect pitch. He can play a note and she can tell him what note that was. And she can listen to a song like from Moana, and she can tell him if he's singing it at the wrong pitch or what pitch it is. And she can then recreate that and sing at that pitch. She's so fascinating. She's so fascinating to look at and to listen to. She's so cute. And she's been doing this since she was like 4. Maybe she's like 6 now or 7 or something like that. What's her name? Claire something is her name. She's super cute. Look her up too. Fascinating with regard to how the brain processes music. It's really, really interesting. So during preschool years, okay, so here's the fun thing about music and learning to sing. You have to teach kids how to sing. Some kids, many kids, they don't necessarily, sometimes singing becomes screaming, and working with preschoolers and toddlers around music. I have always started off with rhythm. Kids are born understanding rhythm. And so we use drums and we use sticks and shakers to follow the rhythm of a song, to play with the song, to keep a beat, to count a beat. and then also to modulate loudness. Some kids think screaming is singing. They have to learn sort of to sing by listening and by having music time in preschool and things of that nature. Music education, I think, is just so important. And it's not about playing instruments. It's also about using your voice and using your body and dance and movement and things like that. Yeah, nature and nurture. There are parts, some people like perfect pitch. That's a biological phenomenon. It is a gift. So implement rousing social studies lessons, teach and advocate for the arts, integrate art into your lessons, and integrate art into language and science, and draw the volcano, right? That's integrating art. That integrates science and art. So integrate these things and use all of them in your classroom. And that will help. Like if you have a kid who's really into art, but really doesn't like volcanoes, and you're studying volcanoes, if they can do art around volcanoes, they're going to have more of an interest in it. So really look at these different areas as ways to integrate and develop a curiosity, right? Some are foundational, reading, writing, math. But with regard to science and social studies, it's really about developing curiosity about the bigger world around them, and being interested in learning about things, and sort of knowing things and discovering things. It triggers the pleasure centers of the brain for kids. Phew, that was a long one. Okay, we got through it. You can read these on your own. These take-home messages. This is just what they are. Okay, we are, I will put up a video, but we are going into our spring break after this. We're kind of like 2 chapters behind, and I think that was just an error on my part in how I put the syllabus together. But we're going into spring break, so I will put up a video and talk about that. All right, you guys. All right, have a great day.